This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing, Jamie Bogner. We have an interesting conversation today that has happened in a very roundabout way. My guest on the podcast is Matt Riggs from Riggs Beer Company in Urbana, Illinois. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Matt reached out to us, I guess it was January or so, and pitched the idea of doing an episode of the podcast where we talked about Six Row. They're a old school family farm, and he is a studied brewer who's spent a little over a year in a brewing program in Germany, and then brewed professionally in Germany for another year, a few years after that. Then came back to the family farm in Illinois, and is now working on estate grown grain and brewing with those, and kind of carving out a special program there. You can tell us more about that in a second, and I hope I got that history right, Matt.
Yeah, mostly. Yeah,
mostly.
I worked in the industry in Germany first, and then went to school. But yeah, other than that, the same.
Perfect.
Yeah.
My timeline was slightly off. Pitched this idea of talking about Six Row because certainly it's falling out of favor with a lot of brewers and of course maltsters as well. But they are, working with it on the farm and brewing with it, and so it became a story for the for the magazine. He actually wrote a brewer's perspective on it. I believe it was for our IPA issue a couple issues ago. And funny, it just finally made it to the website last week because we do stagger the content to make sure that subscribers are receiving some benefit for what they do. And so magazine will end up on the website. Some of it, not the entire magazine content, but some of the content will migrate out to the website. Generally, 3 or 4 months after that issue might hit. So Matt's story made it to the website, and we actually had a number of people start emailing us about this story. And one of them was a request to talk to Matt about, on the podcast about brewing with Six Row. And so here we are in that kind of roundabout way. A pitch for the podcast became a magazine story, which then became a conversation on the podcast. But I am excited to talk about it because it's a subject that not a lot of people are focusing on. Certainly Six Row has a storied position in American beer and American brewing, one that kind of legacy and some misconceptions about it, Matt is going to clear up. Before we talk about this, nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico partner with G&D Chillers. Innovative modular designs and no proprietary parts propel G&D ahead as the premier choice for your glycol chilling needs. Breweries you recognize like Russian River, Ninkasi, Jack's Abbey, Samuel Adams, Riggs Beer Company.
Yeah, breweries you don't recognize even.
and more. Trust G&D to chill the beer you love. Call G&D Chillers to discuss your project today or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. You just bought a second one, right, Matt?
Yeah, we just put a second one on order. We've gotten along with a 7 horsepower unit for just 4.5 years now, and we're at the point where we're getting closer to 3,000 barrels, and that 7 horsepower unit, even with a big buffer tank, we needed to get a second one, and we loved the idea of buying the exact same unit, just so we could swap out parts easily. We knew that it was a good unit, so yeah, we just put our second one on order. Should be shipped here any day now.
That's fantastic. We appreciate their support and have appreciated their support for a long time here on the podcast. This episode is also brought to you by HS1228 Hops, third in the new BSG Hop Solution portfolio. HS1228 takes you all the way to the heart of the West Coast. HS1228 is bursting with pronounced tropical fruit like mango, pineapple, citrus, and pine characteristics that bring out a classic West Coast hop character. Designed for late kettle or dry hop for various hops-forward styles. Learn more about BSG Hop Solutions online and look for more BSG Hop Solutions releases coming very soon. So Matt, why don't you walk us through some of your history in brewing and some of the family history of the farm and how you got to where you are now making beer on the farm?
Well, the story starts in southeast Champaign County, Illinois, where my brother and I were born and raised on our family's 5th generation farm. My family's been farming the ground continuously since 1874. So we're an was a pretty old farm, but we're not a very big farm. We never really grew, which in the modern agricultural world of commodity farming put us in a tough position. We knew from a young age. Our parents were very clear that, hey, you're going to have to do something else to supplement the farm income, or really, the farm can supplement your primary income, but it's got to be doing something else. And my brother and I were kind of bummed out about that. We love the idea of growing things, and we have a real emotional attachment to the ground itself, because it's 5 generations of our family, it providing for us and vice versa. And so we kind of started thinking, what can we do outside the box? Ground is very expensive to buy. The return on investment of Illinois farmland is like 40 or 50 years. So like no bank is going to say, oh yeah, this cash flows, let's do this. And we didn't come from money. So just buying more land to scale wasn't an option. So we needed to specialize. And, in our young adult lives, we started to discover this divine beverage, malted beverage called beer. And at one point, I like to say, I don't remember exactly what brand it is, but let's say it was a 30-pack of Busch Light. We were probably about halfway through that bad boy, sitting out in our machine shed, when we were visited by the Busch Light angel. We were inspired, descended upon us and said, boys, this beverage you love so much, it's, primarily grain and water, and
right.
You can grow grain. Why don't you do this? And we were like, whoa, Busch Light angel, you're so wise. Turns out, the Busch Light angel was glossing over some really tough technical hurdles that we'd have to get to. And we didn't have any money, and we didn't have any experience. We had no education. So it took us a while to get there. But, I could say now, probably 15, 20 years later, that's exactly what we're doing. And so that idea has been in our heads. My brother and I are the two owners here, and we work here every day. It's been in our head for well over a decade. And it took a long time to get prepared to do this. You need a lot of money to start a brewery. And when you don't have a lot of money, you got to work hard for a lot of years and save it up. And you can't just flip a switch and make it happen. So this whole time, the last 15 years, or before we could get this thing started, I'm thinking, man, this is a brilliant concept. We're going to vertically integrate grain from the farm. We're going to add a ton of value to it. I hope other people don't do this before I get a chance to do this and box me out of this market. And every year, as we both went to the University of Illinois on military scholarships, coming from a small farm family, our parents were like, hey, figure out a way to pay for college and you can go. So we did that. And Darren was in the Navy. I was in the Marines. During that whole time, he and I, no matter where we were in the world, were thinking, hey, do you still want to do this? Yeah, I still want to do this. Do you want to do this? Yeah. Is anybody doing this? Like, this is going to happen. Craft beer is exploding. This is the right time. One of these days, somebody's going to be growing grain on their farm and vertically integrated into beer. And then we'll be like, hey, we want to do that too. And maybe it won't be as novel. But time kept going by, and there were a ton of IPAs, and there was a ton of trends that happened. But I feel like right now is really the time when vertically integrated grain is starting to become an in thing, and it's really exciting to be part of that. So the initial idea happened, around year 2000, and
wow.
We rolled it over in our minds over and over. We were both military officers for several years, got out of the military, and decided at the same time to transition into brewing. It was really kind of a come to Jesus talk. I told my brother one time, I said, hey, I'm dropping papers. I'm getting out. I'm going to Germany. You should do the same thing. You should get out and get into the brewing industry. So we simultaneously got out of the military and got into brewing.
So why'd you decide to jump out of the military and go to Germany in particular? Well,
my wife's a German.
Okay.
And we'd been married for several years and worked, she lived and worked here in the US, and I was really wanting to get into brewing. I dipped my toe. My first brewing experience was when I first moved out to San Diego. I was stationed out in Camp Pendleton, and just by happenstance, walked across. Long story short, I walked into, after a very long voyage, I mixed up Escondido and Encinitas. I just moved out there, and there was supposed to be an Oktoberfest in one of them, and I went to the wrong one, and then I just walked for miles and, having a good day off, and I stumbled across San Marcos Brewery and Grill and was like, man, I'm thirsty. It's a brewery. And went in there, and there's this older guy in the back, looked very hot and uncomfortable, and he eventually came up to the bar and got a glass of water, and I said, hey, you make beer? That's pretty cool. And after a long conversation, he said, why don't you come help me out for free, and I'll give you some food and some beer. And I said, that's awesome. So I actually never, I didn't start as a home brewer. I started kind of helping out a guy that I just bumped into at the right place at the right time, and absolutely fell in love with it. So when I decided, hey, this is definitely actually what I want to do for a living, my wife was like, hey, we lived here for several years in your home country. Why don't you do this brewing thing back where I'm from in southern Germany? And I said, yeah, I've been to southern Germany. There's really great beer there. I do owe it to you to live in your country for a while. That's a fair shake. But don't they all speak German over there? She's like, yeah, indeed they do. But it's super easy. You'll learn it. And that was an oversimplification. That was untrue. German is not easy at the age of 28. But that's what we did. We sold our house here in the States and moved to southern Germany, where her family's from, and started at the very bottom of the ladder at a very old family-owned and operated brewery in Bavaria called Brewhouse Faust in Miltenberg, Germany. Fun thing about Faust is they've been making beer in the same location since 1654. They haven't moved. So, we made beer on the Hauptstrasse, brick-lined streets, lager caves built into the side of the hill. Every beer we made was open-top fermentation, lagers and wheat beers. I got a very traditional introduction into Bavarian brewing. I loved a lot of it. One of the downsides is when you open ferment everything, and you've got a bunch of old horizontal lager tanks that don't have CIP connections. I spent about 4 or 5 hours every day inside of a vessel cleaning.
Right.
One reason we don't have open fermentation here in the brewery, right? It's like, I don't exactly want to do that anymore. But it was a great experience. Spent a year and a half at Faust. At this time, my brother was going to UC Davis to their brewing program.
Right.
And he got a job while I was still in Germany at Anheuser-Busch out in California, thinking, hey, if we never do this farm, integrated brewery, at least we're in a really awesome industry doing something we enjoy.
Sure.
After about a year at Faust, it became pretty clear to me that in order to stay in advance and get paid more.
Sure.
I would have to probably get certified and through the formal German brewing and malting education system. And at that point in time, I also kind of became pretty confident in my German skills. Living and working in a place where you're immersed, you can pick up something fairly quickly. So believe it or not, they don't speak English in a 365-year-old Bavarian brewery. So,
Right.
So I decided, I need to figure out what pipeline I want to get into. And not a lot of Americans understand the German brewing educational pipeline. So maybe I can clear up for those who are interested. So most brewers start what's called an Ausbildung, where after they graduated high school, and there's a couple different levels of high school, but no matter what, you close out one of those as early as the age of 16, you can get into a trade apprenticeship program called an Ausbildung, and there's one for brewing and malting. And the way that works is a young person finds a brewery or malt house that wants to sponsor them, and essentially they spend half of their time over a 3-year period at that company working and kind of learning stuff on the job. And the other half of their time, they go to a state-sponsored trade school where they get some general ed classes, but also a lot of kind of field-specific technical training. And then at the end of the 3-year period, they pass all the exams, and then they're a certified journeyman brewer. And then the next kind of level in brewing is split into 2 different pipelines. You can either do a Diplom Braumeister pipeline where you go to a university and you have kind of a more traditional university style experience, maybe 8 hours of classes a week, some heavy chemistry and all that kind of stuff. And usually after 2 or 3 years, passing the exams, you get your diploma Braumeister. The pipeline I went through is similar, but a little bit more condensed and a little more trade focused. That is the Handwerks Braumeister and Maltmeister. Handwerk, handwork. It's like craft trade school. The requirements to go there is you need to either have been an Ausgebildete, so gone through the Ausbildung brewer, or you need to have a pre-existing degree and a year and a half of on-the-job training. And because I'd already had a degree from the U.S. and I'd had the on-the-job training, it's a little bit more condensed, but it's more intense. We were about 40 hours a week in the classroom for a full year.
Wow.
So those are the two different pipelines. They both have their pros and cons. I'm super glad that I got to, that I chose the one I did. The advantage, in my opinion, of the Handwerksmeister route is that, in my class of 35 other brewers, every single one of them had been through the Ausbildung. Except there were 3 or 4 foreigners. We had a Cuban, myself, a Belgian, and a Korean. And obviously we kind of went the other way because we don't have those programs in our home countries, but every German had been through the 3-year Ausbildung program. A lot of them had then worked a decade at their brewery before they're like, hey, I'm taking the next step. So the intense kind of resident knowledge, not just from the faculty, but also from the students, made it an awesome experience. Like I sat behind a guy who had filtered like 7 million hectoliters of Eichbaum beer in Mannheim. And I'm like, so when the professor gets up there and talks about filtering it's not just a one-way conversation. The guy's like, well, hold on a second. There's a lot of ways to achieve that goal. So it was a great learning experience. I went to Domen's in Munich and had a great time.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about now coming back to the farm and conceiving of a brewing program. Before we do that, this episode is brought to you by Mountain Rose Herbs, purveyors of the highest quality organic herbs, spices, and teas. Whether you want to add depth to your next golden triple with classic notes of cinnamon, pepper, and clove, or artfully layer exotic, zesty grains of paradise into a perfect ale, adding botanicals to your brewing is an easy way to customize a delicious flavor profile. Mountain Rose Herbs has been providing organic herbs and spices to chefs, herbalists, and dedicated brewers for more than 3 decades. Learn more at mountainroseherbs.com and get 10% off your first order with the code CRAFTBEER10. Also, Yakima Valley Hops is your hop source, whether you're brewing 5 gallons or 5 barrels. Get all the hops you want when you want them. They source the highest quality hops from the Yakima Valley and premium growing regions around the world so that you have access to the largest hop portfolio possible, even hard to find varieties like Citra, Nelson Sauvin, and Galaxy. Homebrewers visit yakimavalleyhops.com and wholesale accounts can find them at spothops.com. So Matt, you come back, you've done your you've done your semi-apprenticeship at Faust. You've studied for an intense year at Domen's. You come back to launch the brewery on the family farm, and you start conceiving of the beers you're going to make and how those integrate in this vertically integrated kind of farm brewery. Talk to me a little bit about that approach as you started to think about what we're going to make and how we're going to make it relevant to drinkers, but also connect it back to the farm.
Well, we didn't put all our eggs in one basket and say that we're going to be, from the get-go to a very large degree a vertically integrated brewery, because that would have been very foolish. Trying to grow barley in a place where nobody's grown barley in 70 years and then saying, I'm going to make malting quality barley my first year and that's just going to make great beer. That would have been pretty foolish. So we took a pretty measured approach, I think, in the beginning. We knew that there, at least in our area, breweries weren't really focusing on German styles. So we said, okay, we're going to make German styles beers and we're going to make them authentically and accurately. And we're going to play around with and try to ramp up where we can any ingredient grain wise that we can grow. But it wasn't like, hey, from the get go, this is going to be a defining characteristic because we weren't sure that it was going to work. I had never made a beer with adjuncts like in ever.
Yeah.
Right. In years in brewing. They don't exactly do that in Germany.
Right.
Let alone whole kernel corn. Where Darren worked, they use usually corn grits or rice. We didn't know it would work. So we came back and said, well, first things first, let's grind up some corn and, look online. There's these old recipes of how they used to do it. So let's try to do it that way. And it worked. It worked really, really well. We just crushed corn and did the gelatinization double mash. And it was like, wow, this lager turned out pretty darn good just with field corn right out of our grain bin. So the corn piece was easy. We'd already been farming corn. We had all the equipment to clean and dry and store and handle corn. Wheat and barley, we started with very small plots, and convincing my dad to take some acreage out of our normal commercial corn and soybeans, that was not an easy conversation. At first, it was like, this is a terrible idea. No way. Why don't you do it in a garden first? I'm like, Dad, we actually need like an acre. Please give me an acre to gamble with. And he's like, all right, take your acre. And we slowly, over the course of 5 years, have been kind of gathering data and getting better every year with some missteps. I mean, there's definitely been some mistakes, and we can talk about those, but it definitely wasn't something where we're like, hey, from the get-go, this is going to be a totally vertically integrated brewery. And it's still not.
Right.
It's never going to be. I'm always going to want to make a Helles with all imported 2-row Pilsner malt from Germany. There's no replacement for that. And I love me some Helles. So we're not going to be 100% our own grain. I don't think you can accurately recreate that beer style using Illinois grown barley.
That's fair enough. And, I think that as breweries everywhere try to, as consumers grow more focused on things with meaning and things with connection, especially, on those local things, I've tried to figure out, like, culturally speaking, why is this, what is driving this, this move to local? And I think that we're experiencing both of this simultaneous culture of infinite availability and, free 2-day delivery via Amazon of any product that you might want anywhere. And so, in this kind of a cultural environment, the things that people start to then prize, again, on this kind of meta level, are the things that are harder to get, or the things that feel more local and connected, the things that other people may not be able to experience outside of a time and a place. And so, in that sense, having a connection matters. Doesn't need to be the only thing that you do, and obviously it's not. I think we all there's very few people outside of those brewers that are in Yakima or the Willamette Valley or on the Midwestern kind of side of Idaho that could even brew with all estate ingredients, just because hops, no offense to the northern Illinois landscape, they're just not going to grow there, in the kind of quality and the quantity that you want. So, but having said that, you have kind of carved out, especially brewing on, the American lager side, bringing back this tradition of brewing with 6-row barley and using that corn adjunct from your farm. Talk to me a little bit about formulating that kind of idea, especially now in a world of malt where it is increasingly hard to even find 6-row, and you grow it yourself on the farm and then brew with it now?
Yep, that's right. So we started off very first batches of American lager commercially here. We were using all 2-row North American barley and our just yellow field corn that was going to go to the elevator and we were going to get $4 a bushel for, which is not very much. It's very tough to make money at that price point, which is why we're doing the brewery, right? So we started off doing it that way, and really in corn brewing, there's a couple different forms you can use corn in. A lot of home brewers will use flakes, and even commercial brewers that have a 2-vessel system, they'll use corn flakes that have already been gelatinized, kind of milled and gelatinized. That allows you to just smash at one temperature and get conversion and everything. Big brewers will use grits. Some big brewers will use grits, which have been degermed, or that's the term for removing the oily portion of the corn. Corn has a fair amount of oil, and that can be negatively sensoric, and it's not good for the foam. There's a lot of reasons why we want to lower oil. Or, some brewers, you've probably seen a Super Bowl commercial talking about corn syrup, right? That's already been converted, so you don't even need to worry about enzymes or anything. We wanted to do the old way that nobody was really doing anymore, which is crushing corn and putting it in an adjunct mash. And we definitely found that using normal standard number 2 yellow dent field corn did carry some oil and some corn characteristic over into the finished product. It made the beer a little bit different, but I think more often than not, sensorically, we were thinking, hey, this is just a little bit too corny. Even at 20% of the grist, there's too much corn tortilla being brought into the finished beer flavor, which then kind of led us to think, well, we don't want to get a degermer that's expensive, and it's kind of taking us towards the more modern style. We want to stay old school. One day, I literally just typed into Google, and if you do this now, any of the listeners do this now, if you type in low oil corn, either the top, or I think now there's a Farm Progress article about us, but now it's the second. It used to be the top response was the Illinois Long-Term Selection Experiment ran at the University of Illinois in a little town called Urbana.
Yeah,
so I was like, no kidding.
Close to you, huh?
Yeah. One of my old professors is in charge of this experiment that started in 1896. And it is the longest running continuous natural selective trial in higher order plants in the world. Right. So a very long, every year, what they've been doing is they took a variety of corn in 1896 that was actually taken from a farmer about 4 miles from our farm. So it's really cool, all the synergies in this story. And every year they select for high and low protein and high and low oil. And then they take those plants, and then every year they try to drive those values further and further just naturally through selection, and to see what Mother Nature can do and how far to push it. And I was like, wow, okay, so somebody at the U of I campus has the lowest oil corn in the world. I wrote the lab, and they wrote right back, and we're super excited because commercially there's a bunch of uses for high oil or high protein. They have never had anybody ever care about the low oil variant. And literally they had like a handful of these seeds that were just enough to keep the experiment going so that they wouldn't lose their status as the longest running continuous trial and all that. And they're like, oh, you're interested in low oil? Give me a year and I can prop you up a couple pounds of corn. And in 2 years, maybe we'll have enough to try a batch. And I'm like, you get to work on that, sir. Do that, because I'm so excited about trying this low oil corn. And the added bonus, it's white corn. So the chemical compounds that make corn yellow, we're also darkening the beer, and they've got actually some flavor compounds that we think were influencing the nacho in our beer. Sure. So it was like, man, this is a dream come true. And so after a couple of years of them propagating up some seed, we were able to try it out, and it's definitely helped. I mean, we cut the oil in the corn in half naturally without having to do anything. And it's also fun to say, hey, we're the only commercial users of this really long experiment at our land-grant college right here in town. So it's been a lot of fun, and we haven't changed the ratio. So we're still using 20% corn, but the corn character in the beer had been markedly reduced to the point where there's an added depth, I think, in the beverage. But it doesn't really say I'm corn. It just says I'm kind of a well-rounded and layered simple lager. And so that's the big key was finding a low oil corn that was white and using it. And then our first couple crops of barley were 2-row because we'd been told, everybody's moving to 2-row. It's just inherently better. It wasn't until we ran into some agronomic problems that we started to think, hey, we need to hedge our bets and maybe try some older genetics that have worked better around here. Because at this brewery, the farmer is the brewer. And so if the farmer says, hey, this 2-row is a deal breaker, I'm getting killed over here, it's economically not feasible. We're the same people. So we're like, all right, well, let's look at 6-row.
I'm gonna crack open a can of your American lager. Since we're talking about it, I just feel like makes some sense to drink some too. And you sent me some corn samples here, and I did nibble on them while we were talking about that. And it is interesting. It's certainly, it's kind of a different, and I can see that kind of drier, low oil kind of approach to this. It seems like it's like a pre-prepared drier grain, just, for exactly what you're talking about.
It's very powdery, right? I mean, so it's all starch.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has to add up to 100% in a seed. And if you've lowered oil, then starch kind of fills that gap. So it's just this low oil white corn we're using. It's very powdery. It's very neutral. It doesn't have a lot of tortilla flavor. If I gave you a handful of yellow field corn that we grow on our farm, it'd be very corny. But this stuff, just eating it, you can tell it brings a lot more neutral flavor, and texturally you can tell that there's more starch there and less oil.
So how much is Dad letting you grow of this corn on the farm right now?
We have taken over the decision making. He's happy to admit that he was probably a little bit mistaken in doubting that this could work.
Yeah.
And at this point, he's like, all right, boys, you got it. Do what you want to do. And to be fair, of our 316 acres this last year, only 60 of those acres were brewing ingredients. The rest of it was still conventionally farmed.
Yeah.
But 60 acres makes an immense amount of beer.
Yeah.
I've actually got a calculation here. So 1 acre of barley that we grow will make about 80 kegs of beer. 1 acre of wheat will make about 175 kegs. And this is assuming that we're making an 100% beer with that grain, and we're not making 100% wheat beer. And then even the low oil corn yielding half of what modern commercial varieties do, we still would get 218 kegs per acre. So we can make a lot of kegs of beer with not a lot of acres.
It's an interesting one. And, as you alluded to before, commercial agriculture pushing towards commodity pricing and farmers, taking that easy route of filling up the silos, taking their crop to the local grain bins, is a low profit, low value kind of proposition. And, what you are doing with that family farm is creating a much higher value proposition, and increasing the value of that crop along the value chain by imbuing it not just with meaning, but also, a story and, specific usage that is, not a commodity at all. The fact that, you're growing 6-row barley on the farm and no one else is generally in the state of Illinois, or, there may be some grown in the state of Illinois, but you may, you're some of the few doing that. The fact that you may be the only place growing this kind of corn variety creates a specific value to that. And it's a nice departure from this corporate model of farming that is simply about scale and about producing, the greatest amount of goods at the lowest cost, possible price, and so from a family perspective, how has that impacted the way that the finances of the farm work, and the way that you're able to kind of, account for the value of these crops in a different way than you used to?
Yeah. So the farm didn't invest in the brewery, and to be totally clear, we don't want that, right? We wanted to keep this a completely separate entity. You don't have a 5th generation family farm and then mortgage it to start a new business, right? Because that's how you end at 5 generations. And so we wanted to be completely separate entities. We pay the farm a premium to grow us a premium specialized product. And we kind of have to work at identifying the fair price backwards. Our goal is to make 1 acre of brewing grain 125% the profitability of what that acre would do on the commercial market if it was making commercial grain. So we don't just say, hey, I can get barley from this supplier at 60 cents a pound. That's, I'll pay you 80. We go completely the opposite direction, say it's irrelevant what the market price for it is. We're going to keep separate books. And at the end of the year, we're going to look at the profitability on the commercial side, and then we're going to assign a price that achieves 125%, an increase, an additional 25% profitability for the farm, which means that we grow some very expensive barley. It does not make any real commercial sense for the brewery. But it does make commercial sense for the family farm. And that's one way that we hope we can usher it into the 6th generation, is that we're giving it kind of an unfair advantage on we're paying $12 to $14 a bushel for wheat and barley. And that's just crazy. That's like 3 or 4 times the market price. But luckily there's profitability in brewing. And
3 or 4 times the
that's
market price, but that's actually not out of line for what craft brewers will pay for general craft malt, from a outside maltster. It's more, yeah.
Well, but that's not including malting costs. I'm just saying raw.
Gotcha.
I'm just saying raw grain.
Okay,
yeah, no, we take a bath on the malting as well.
Okay,
but
it gets
you got to think
more expensive.
we don't. Yeah, it's really kind of expensive. People say, "Oh, you must be saving a lot of money vertically integrating." It's like, no, we are losing money vertically integrating,
right.
But we're also pretty unique in a field of 8,000 brewers, and we don't have a marketing budget really. We don't spend any money on doing stuff out in the market. We've never had a salesperson at the brewery. We rely on our wholesalers to do that. So I can kind of justify it in saying, hey, us doing this really tangible, cool thing, that's our marketing budget. And that's what makes us unique. And so far it's worked pretty well.
Let's dive into, where do you malt then, these grains? Is there a local craft maltster that'll take, because you're talking about low volume malting now here too.
Yeah. So several years ago, I was back from Germany visiting, helping with the harvest one year, and I went to a homebrew club meeting, and everybody wanted me to meet this crazy guy named Eric, who was bringing malt samples to the homebrew club, and he wanted to start a malt house. And people are like, yeah, but I've tried some, and I haven't had very good success, because these people are all doing single temperature infusion, homebrew, and they're not getting good extraction or whatever. And I'm like, yes, I do need to meet this guy. So we met each other and started talking. He farms 40 miles north of us, so pretty local, and he has had like a lifelong passion of malting grain. And he really thought that 5 or 10 years ago, the market was going to open up and all these Chicago breweries were going to come down and want to buy his grain. And again, the problem is, not a lot of places are outfitted with a system that can really modify either thermally or enzymatically to correct for some deficiencies in locally grown grain. You're going to have a fairly inconsistent product. And if the brewery isn't fully invested in that maltster and saying, I'm going to share that risk with you, which very few breweries are willing to do,
right, then
you don't get a malting industry. Especially at the very small scale that we've got with him. So we literally will take a wagon of wheat and barley up to his farm, and we help him out. I was up there last week helping him build his new kiln. We clean grain up there together. We help automate his malting system. My brother is a computer guy, so helped him out with that. So we've kind of got our own personal maltster, and it's a necessary marriage between a very committed brewery and a very committed malt house that rely on each other for stability.
That's a fantastic story. As I'm drinking this American lager, I am incredibly impressed. The foam alone is beautiful, glassy, thick, long, lingering. So now let's talk about the construction of this beer, because I really want to get into, it is every bit as classically constructed as a beautiful German lager, and yet this is American ingredients right out of your farm in Illinois. Before we talk specifically about that, if you're looking to start or expand your craft brewery, look no further than Abe Beverage Equipment for complete brewing and packaging solutions. Abe has been a trusted partner for over 1,000 breweries worldwide and is known for their excellent service. Contact Abe today for a quote on a complete brew system at abeequipment.com. Abe offers turnkey solutions from 3 to 60 barrel brew houses and canning lines from 15 to 90 cans per minute. Visit abeequipment.com for complete brewery solutions. Matt, you guys have an Abe brew house, don't you?
We love G&D and we love Abe. We love these sponsors. Yeah, our Abe Brewhouse is an absolute beast. They custom
I swear
built
this is
one
totally
with me.
Coincidental. We really didn't. We're having this conversation right now.
So I'm literally at German brewing school and thinking, okay, I want to design this 4-vessel system with all these cool German pathways to do all the stuff that I want to do. And I reached out to, back then it was American Beer Equipment, ABE, now it's ABE, same great people. And they worked with me to design, they had never done one before, and they designed one with me, and man, it's awesome. And there's almost nothing I would change about it. And we just did our 600th turn on it, and I've had to replace almost nothing. It is an amazing piece of kit.
Well, you heard it from Matt. I didn't even need to do the read. I should have just let you do that one. Also, if you enjoy this podcast and you want to help us continue to bring you valuable content from the world's best brewing minds, Craft Beer and Brewing's all-access subscriptions are the best way to do it. Get a year of the print and digital editions of the magazine, plus access to our library of video courses, a special deep dive email, and more. Go to beerandbrewing.com and click on the subscribe button to join now. And you may read occasional stories from Matt that have been in the issue. And I imagine we'll have to continue talking about some more in the future because this is fascinating. And I love what you're doing in this world of vertical integration. So Matt, let's talk about American lager and, kind of formulating an idea between your locally grown 6-row barley. I shouldn't even call it locally, your estate grown 6-row barley, and then this kind of 20% core ingredient. When we started talking about 6-row barley, where did you come up with the specific varieties that you decided to plant on the farm? And then as you were conceiving of the recipe, talk to me about that development process and how you worked through an iterative process to get the beer where you want it to be.
The iteration is continuous, and the varieties, the search for new varieties will never end. So we haven't said that we're like exactly where we want to be and we're just going to stay there. We're open to new ideas all the time. We've thrown a lot of stuff at the wall agronomically to see what will work, and sometimes it works once, but then it doesn't work again, and that's not good enough. We needed to work like 5 out of 6 times before we're okay with that risk. And so that's how this process started. We started with a German 2-row variety, a spring 2-row called Thessa. Actually, our first ever trial crop, was a spring 6-row robust from North American variety. Then moved to Thessa. We ended up figuring out that it liked Central Europe a lot more than it liked Central Illinois. I think that crop we harvested had 556 ppm of beta glucan, which made for a very interesting barley wine that had like I've still got a bottle. We hand bottled one bottle just because I never want to forget this. And literally there's a beta glucan layer on the bottom half of the bottle. It's the wildest thing. Whenever brewers come and want to nerd out about stuff, I'm like, hey, I got to show you this barley wine bottle with 556 ppm beta glucan. Then we tried a winter variety, Malt 2-row, and actually we're very happy with it. That next year we were going to try another 2-row variety over the winter, Violetta. And that fall the previous fall we had planted a 6-row spring variety called Lacey. Lacey's the variety that we've planted the most of. Spring 6-row, it just doesn't die on us, and it doesn't get us things that are so far out of spec that we can't salvage it. So I don't think it's necessarily the best variety of barley for us to grow forever, but it's one where I know we can at least salvage. We will have Riggs Estate barley if we plant Lacey. Part of that reason is because in the spring, the winter can't kill it, so we are guaranteed that it's not going to get a winter kill, and we will have something to harvest. The Violetta crop that I mentioned in January 2019, got just decimated by some cold weather. We've never had a 6-row variety do that on us. So we this year planted Thoroughbred. We harvested in mid-June. That's a winter 6-row variety, North American, obviously, and the initial malt analysis, raw grain malt analysis back on the Thoroughbred is the best we've ever seen. So I think we're getting better. But really, like if somebody tells me there's a new variety that's got good characteristics and I can nerd out on it a little bit and say, yep, this is a good prospect, I'll put in 5 acres of it, absolutely. Because I don't think on the barley side we have not found the holy grail, because we're so far outside kind of the prime growing region, and we're going to continue to try anything. But we've definitely seen a lot more success with 6-row as compared to 2-row on the farm, and that just made it an obvious decision for us to stick with it. And then it became a thing. Like, as soon as I started talking to maltsters and figuring out that nobody was making 6-row and it wasn't going to be for sale anymore, I actually had somebody email me the other day from down in Texas. They want to buy 6-row off of us, a brewery, because they want to make a pre-prohibition lager.
Right.
And I'm like, I guess we're now a malt house, like a malt supplier. That's we've gotten a lot of feedback on the article as well, and it's actually kind of fun now to say, hey, we're gonna continue this tradition, and I don't care if they breed 2-row to the point where, you know, it kind of takes all of the incentive away from 6-row. It's kind of fun to brew with an ingredient that has a unique American origin and that not everybody's doing, or very few people are doing.
There's, you know, for commercial 6-row now, like maybe one malt house in North America that is consistently still supplying it. So it is a kind of a dying thing. At the same time, you know, there have been some really interesting revivals of 6-row on the craft malt side. And I know the folks down at Riverbend in North Carolina, you know, were trying to find barley that'll grow in North Carolina. They've, you know, 2-row does not grow very well down there. 6-row grows much better. And I know that they've been working on that kind of locally grown 6-row. And so it does seem as if craft malt in a broader sense is the one way to kind of keep this this kind of, you know, native North American barley alive and growing. Talk to me a little bit about the malt process then for this. You know, you harvest, you dry it, you know, but then when it comes to like creating malt specs, you're now dealing with you know, you can actually malt it to exactly, you know, what you want in the brew house, and then and so I'm curious about that kind of process. I'm also curious then how, because you're working at this kind of scale, you look and evaluate the quality of that malt, and then, you know, even as you're brewing with it, understand how, you know, year to year, or even batch to batch, or even portions of the field versus others, what kind of variety exists and what kind of parameters you're working with at a brewing level for this kind of variation. You know, again, I'm curious, you know, from your perspective of brewing with it, what that range looks like for you, how you kind of accommodate fluctuations year to year, batch to batch, area to area, terroir to terroir, and whatnot.
Well, I think the first thing a brewer's got to do is say, you know, I'm not going to sacrifice quality just because I want something really bad. The American lager you're drinking right now has got some 2-row in it. That's because this last year of 6-row, we had some fairly high protein level that even when you cut it with corn, by the time it got out of the malt house, our free amino nitrogen was at, you know, in the 170s, and that carries a flavor impact that if you go 100% with a 6-row variety of malt that has 170 ppm a fan, I think you're gonna, in a pale beer, in a pale neutral lager, you're gonna taste it. Now I can put that in our IPL. There's no way you're going to pick it up. I can put that in a Kolsch, and I think I can even hide it with some ester. The first thing you got to do is say, you know, let's not force it. I've got beer drinkers that support us, and they don't want a huge amount of variation. I think that they're understanding that being a smaller brewery, you're going to see a little bit of variation, but I kind of abuse their trust. I think if I say, well, I don't care if this year's barley crop gave me too much or too little of something, I'm going to use it anyway. We have to be careful to balance our desire to vertically integrate with our desire to make great beer. So that's the first thing. We've made a lot of 100% 6-row beers, but with the Lacey 6-row variety from last year, the way we farmed it, we couldn't get it to the point where we've made a few batches of American lager. We've pushed it, we've tested it, and honestly, it's been like, no, we can't go 100% this year. I'm really excited about the thoroughbred. We got the protein out of the field down to 9.3, which is like even lower than spec. So I'm very confident that we're going to be able to integrate that one at 100%. You just can't push it too hard because you're going to burn people. You're going to burn a consumer, and you might have a great story, but consumers want to drink a beer that is consistently the same and really good. If we had a different brand or like I said on the IPL, a lot of times we'll be able to push it. We'll blend in more of our out of spec grain into our more flavorful beers, and we'll keep our tightest in spec grain for our most neutral beers. If you aren't doing that, then and you're trying to grow grain on a small local scale, I think that you're either going to be wasting a lot of grain, or you're going to be putting out product that is inconsistent, because there is a ton of variability from year to year, and our agronomic processes are different every year. We're getting better, and I think that the left and right limits of where most of those specifications are getting tighter, but we're still not at the point where every year, every crop, I can go 100% on our most neutral beers.
And so what's that testing process look like? Do you send out each of the malted batches to a lab to kind of analyze this, or are you kind of analyzing before malting, after? What is that kind of analytical process look like?
Yep. So step one is we send the raw grain off for analysis. So we like to harvest a little bit early, a little bit wet. That's going to keep us from getting pre-germinative sprout in the field, which really messes up numbers very quickly. If you get moisture right before harvest, you get some grain that already germinates, and it's tough to salvage that grain. So we like to come in, harvest the grain at 16 to 18% moisture, get it straight into a grain bin and hit it with a lot of air and dry it down to 14 and a half moisture. That's kind of like your summer safe zone. It's about as fast, as low as you can go, as quickly as you can go with grain bin air in our area, because it's just so humid. For the long term, you want to get down to 12% moisture, but you just can't achieve that in the summer in Central Illinois. So we get it down to 14.5% moisture. At that point, we run it through a grain cleaner over a gravity table, and that helps any dead or diseased grains we can remove. Any weed seed or chaff we can remove. So once we get a good clean sample, we send a raw grain analysis to Hartwick College out in New York, where Aaron McLeod and his team have done a really great job of getting us quick turnaround. That raw grain analysis is going to tell us a handful of things. Our total protein, obviously the normal spec is 9.5 to 11.5% for 2-row. 6-row, you can kind of go up towards 12, but I'm telling you, if you want to use 100% your own grain and you're above 12, it better be in a wheat beer. It can't be in a pale lager, or it doesn't matter the amount of corn that you're going to cut it with. You can't recover from that. We're going to look at disease. So fusarium, head blight, or DON, vomitoxin. We got to be under 1 ppm in the finished product to give it to humans. So that drives, our crop rotation. Both of those factors drive our crop rotation. We've stopped using any fertilizer in the field because we found any applied nitrogen is going to drive us above the protein level that we're shooting for. So we just rely on planting into either red clover or soybean residue. Both of those crops fix some nitrogen naturally. You achieve the added bonus of being more environmentally sound because you're not applying any nitrogen. We've found that at least for barley, you've really got to hit it with fungicide every year in this hot, humid climate, or else your vomitoxin levels are going to be too high to use in a human product. Up north, you can probably get away with not doing that. In wheat, we're experimenting with not doing that. Wheat tends to resist that fungus a little bit more. So those are the things we look at a raw grain analysis, and that tells us then how we need to work with Eric to take those things that are out of spec and try to nudge them in spec in the malt house. And luckily, in Germany, brewing and malting is a combined trade. You can't be a brewer without being a maltster, and vice versa. So a big part of brewing school in Germany is malting school, more so than I think in the US. So I got exposed to a fair amount of malting theory and practice, and that allows us to kind of, I'm glad I did. I was sitting there with my classmates thinking, these guys are never going to use this, but this could be really helpful if I'm going to grow barley on my farm.
Sure.
To think, it used to be the classic brewmaster question is, you've got barley from this field and these are the specifications. How do you malt it and how do you brew it in order to hit your target on the back end? That's kind of like the classic German brewmaster exam question is, with this out of spec barley, turn it into this Helles. And that turned out to be pretty useful. So we have a raw grain analysis, and then each batch of malt, we then send back to Hartwick College for a malt analysis that gives us a whole bunch of other traits that we're looking for. So big things there. We're looking to make sure that we didn't damage the enzyme. We've got the alpha and beta that we're looking for. The protein fractioning is huge, not just total protein, but how much of that protein is what size. Middle molecular weight or FAN or insoluble protein. That's going to be very important to us. The friabilimeter word, I just said Wert. I'm switching between German and English. The friabilimeter value is a nice value that the industry places a lot of emphasis on. But I can tell you, I had a batch 6 Lacey that came back to us a couple months ago, and the friabilimeter value was the best we've ever had. It was right in there in commercial spec. A lot of the other indications on that spec sheet were in spec, and that's where I'm like, okay, this batch we're going back to 100%. We're gonna do it, and I can taste the free amino nitrogen. I can taste that American lager when we went to 100%, even though everything else was in spec, that was enough on a pale lager to say, nope, we still got to blend that crop year because we can't get that FAN number down.
So you have malt coming in now, out of the maltster. You know what the specs are. Talk to me a little bit about how what that brewing process looks like now with this 6 row. Obviously, you're doing a lot to promote foam retention in the beer. It looks gorgeous, as Stephen from Hogshead would say. The foam is telling a story as we get through the glass. There are layers of foam kind of sitting there like it is a. It's a beautiful approach. You don't just get that from a single infusion mash and pushing that out there. So talk to me a little bit about that process of brewing with both 6 row and 2 row, obviously, since you're blending those together, but pushing this in an American light lager, first from, how those kind of grains break out on a percentage kind of basis, and then, how you then go through that mash process to conceive of a beer that's going to, achieve this kind of drinking experience that you're looking for.
Right. So the first thing we'll do is identify our most out-of-spec barley. Under-modified, so friabilimeter value of like 72, coarse fine crush difference of like 5, right? So this is highly under-modified. This is grain that you can't even buy. Even the under-modified stuff, I guarantee you the coarse fine difference isn't 5, right? But we have that barley sometimes on some batches from some fields. We identify that, and that becomes our adjunct mash barley. So the cool thing about using raw corn is you have to gelatinize it, and gelatinization temperature is pretty close to decoction temperature. So we can take our most out of spec, most under-modified barley and include that in the gelatinization adjunct mash, where what we're doing is we're thermally rupturing cell wall that normally in the malt house would have been enzymatically broken down to allow enzyme to access starch. Well, those walls are still up. And that's why the coarse fine difference is so large, is because in the lab, the crush is crushing that cell wall mechanically on the fine grind, but not on the coarse grind. We aren't going to like hammer mill the grain. That would cause some issues, and we don't have one. But we can thermally rupture that at the same time that we're doing a gelatinization rest with the adjunct, with the corn. So our worst stuff goes in the adjunct. We're actually kind of experimenting with how high that can go. We started off pretty conservatively, but now I think close to like 20% of our overall barley will also go into the adjunct mash. We do a saccharification rest on the way up anyway, so we're not necessarily wasting all the enzyme that's getting denatured in the gelatinization temperature zone. We are letting it convert any starch that it's got in its own barley first that it has access to. We think there's probably some starch in the corn that it has access to, even pre-gelatinization. But then after holding it at that saccharification rest, we bring it up, we thermally gelatinize the cornstarch, and then we're also rupturing cell wall and thereby thermally modifying under-modified barley. So we kill 2 birds with 1 stone in the adjunct mash, and then we save our best grain for most in spec. I love all our grain, right? It's like children. I love all my barleys. But we save the most in spec grain, most modified grain to go ahead and go in the main mash, where we just do a standard kind of low end protein rest. I'm always kind of a fan of the lower end of the protein scale. That gives us more of that middle molecular weight protein that is good for foam, and especially in a beer where we're going to have some even low oil corn, bring in some oil. I think throwing more middle molecular weight protein at it helps fight that oil's foam negative characteristics. And then we just kind of do a standard beta rest and then alpha beta hybrid rest to depending on how dry we want to dry the beer out. Different varieties are going to attenuate differently, just like different yeast strains will. So different varieties attenuate differently. We've had to actually shorten our beta rest quite a bit in order to not attenuate too much. In the beginning, I was worried about, hey, I want to get really dry beer. I'm going to drive this 4-vessel system to its maximum ability to attenuate. But we were seeing, final gravity, or attenuation is probably a better number to give you. Attenuation like 85%.
Wow.
And in a beer that's 5% ABV, 85, that's pretty hot. That's pretty dry. So we've actually shortened our beta rest over the last couple of years down to 30 minutes or so, and then did the alpha beta rest after that. I don't know if that answers the question, but a little bit of detail there on how we take our worst stuff, and if we're gonna get it hot anyway with the corn, we might as well rupture some cell wall and thermally modify it that way.
It makes sense. What's the goal for finishing gravity now on the American lager?
Low 2s.
Okay.
So 2.1, 2.2, I think is what I like to see most. Original gravity on that guy is 11.6.
Okay. And then do you have an IBU target for it too?
Less than it used to be. We started with it being 17 IBUs, and I steadily every year take 50 grams of bittering hops out of the recipe, and I just keep liking the beer more, and I think people drink more of it. So it's probably now 14 IBUs, but I think on the board, we haven't changed our year-round lineup here since the day we opened. That's probably not very common in the industry, but our 4 beers that are always on are exactly the 4 that we opened with 4.5 years ago. So it still says 17 IBUs. It's probably more like 15.
It's an interesting experience because when I first poured it, it had that American light lager, slight sweetness to it. And the deeper I get into the glass, the drier it actually tastes. And so now as I'm drinking it, I don't perceive that same kind of sweetness. It was an endearing thing early on. And then, it has developed to this experience of dryness as I get down into it.
Well, that's kind of what we shoot for is drinkability. In Germany, Süffig is the term, which, just balance. Try to get balance and drinkability. The beers I love the most are beers where I physically have to be like, whoa, I gotta not drink another. I want another one so bad. I'm thirsty for another one, but I also like beer and I don't want to not like beer. So you kind of have to force yourself to stop. And really, on the American lager, we just kind of target a Helles, maybe the lower end of gravity of what a Helles would be.
Yeah.
But the idea is, how do we make the American lager more like a Helles? And our very first American lager, year 1, year 2, it was too corn driven. It was too American lagerish. And we were making a Helles as a summer seasonal every year. And I just kept thinking, I would pour an American lager, half a glass, and then top it off with Helles and be like, okay, that's better. So we just need to make this kind of old world American lager more like a Helles. And how do you do that? You just, I don't know, look at the specs on a Helles.
Yeah.
From all the way from the grain, when you take corn, all of its characteristics, and 6-row and its characteristics, if you haven't done too bad of a job growing it, and you average those out, this is something I talked about in the article, you hit European 2-row target values. So from a grain perspective, from a farming perspective, try to do that corn 6-row blend to hit what a perfect Helles Pilsner malt would be. And then on the brewing side, the same thing, original gravity, pHs all throughout, temperature steps, attenuation, just kind of mimic a great German Helles, but make it with corn and 6-row and you're going to improve the drinkability. And I think we've done that. It's still hard. We're not nailing it every single time. Sometimes we push it too far with grain where we are out of spec on something. It's like, that was a little bit. Are people noticing it? Probably some, probably not very many. But if we don't push it every day, then I feel like we also kind of get lazy, and then we're just doing token use. I don't want to say that we use a token amount of grain.
Right.
We've used almost 100,000 pounds of corn, wheat, and barley that we've grown on our farm in the last 4.5 years. If it was 10,000, then I'd say maybe that's kind of token use. We're playing up the cool stuff we're doing, but not actually doing much of it.
Right.
So trying to achieve an authentic balance of using enough of your own stuff, but also knowing when not to force it has been something that we continually try to get right.
Talk to me a little bit about hops in the American lager. Is there a variety that you lean on?
Yeah, so pretty much every beer we make in the brewery is bittered with Magnum. For our big hoppy bitter beers, we'll use extract. I'm a fan of extract in big beers. Where I worked in Germany, it's pretty common in the industry. It's a good, clean bitterness. I think most brewers nowadays will admit that, where maybe 5 or 10 years ago, they'd say it was a cheap substitute. It's a great way to get alpha acid. So we use Magnum essentially for all of our beers for a bittering addition. And then on the American, Crystal is what we use as an aroma addition, on our big 15-barrel system. I think it's like 250, might be 300 grams of Crystal. So it's not much, but it's just enough to kind of... Crystal's a great American cross with German noble parents. So it's got that classic German floral, herbal character with just maybe a touch of American fruitiness. And I didn't want to go all German with the hops because it's an American lager. I wanted to use an American hop, but definitely wanted one that would taste and fit in a pale, low ABV lager.
Yeah. Let's I just cracked open one of your Hefeweizen, and I know wheat is another grain that we haven't talked about so far on the podcast. But let's talk about the kind of conception of this, the inspiration for it, and then how you integrate this estate grown wheat into your Hefeweizen.
So wheat's easy here in Central Illinois. It grows well. We use a variety called Erisman that was bred at a university 6 miles from here, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, right? So its entire development time was being grown in experimental fields in the town that we brew beer and where we grow the grain, right? So our wheat field, we always plant a nice big wheat field directly adjacent to our beer garden here at the brewery to show people that, you can grow stuff other than corn and soybeans in Central Illinois. And oh, by the way, this is wheat that we use in the wheat beer that you're drinking right now. And then people are like, whoa, that's cool. And I'm like, yeah. As a farmer and a brewer, that is about as cool as it gets. Erisman wheat.
That's the field that is pictured on the photo of Matt that accompanies this podcast on the website.
Yep, that's right. So that is a winter, soft winter red wheat. Soft red winter wheat is the right way to say that. It is a dream agronomically.
And I'm chewing on some right now and tasting the grain. Again, thank you for sending these the samples, Matt. So I'm sorry for interrupting you. Talk to me a little bit more about the variety on this.
So Erisman winter wheat is great for us. We plant it as soon after the Hessian fly-free date is over. And here in the central part of the state, that is October 1st. And as close to that date as we can plant it, we get it in the ground. It establishes very nicely in the fall. It doesn't winter kill. It doesn't matter. So I mentioned that Violetta died back in January 2019.
Yeah.
Well, we had Erisman planted directly next to it. And the Erisman was like, I don't care. Yeah, it was cold. I'm still going to live and make great wheat babies.
Right.
It's got good disease resistance and it malts very nicely. So as hard as barley has been for us, wheat has been relatively easy.
And it's just I'm marveling at the head on this because it's absolutely spectacular, as you'd expect from a wheat beer. Just that protein just produces beautiful, beautiful foam. So talk to me about recipe inspiration on this and again, how you, worked with this recipe using this now estate grown wheat, working through, any of those, that kind of malting challenge, and then, into the brew house.
Yep. So there's really no secret. This is a 300-year-old beer style that hasn't really changed much, and we just try to execute it well, and then get it to consumers fresh. I think that wheat beer is a beer that suffers in transport. I try a lot of German wheat beers on the shelf warm, and I'm like, yeah, this is not a great style, but in Bavaria, it's the most popular beer style by volume. And where I worked, we sold an absolute ton of it, and I loved it. A big part of that, I think, is don't overthink it. We just over 50% wheat. I'm thinking about pushing that up. I was reading about some brands that have gone up 60 or 70, and I think our Louderton could probably handle that. But really, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We stay in the low 50% wheat, pale barley malt, and then we add just a little bit of Carahel, Weyermann Carahel. I'm a fan of. We could also probably put some Munich in, but I found that I kind of prefer the Carahel over the Munich, or else the beer tends to dry out a little bit too much. I like a little bit of residual sweetness that Carahel gives us, but that's only at like 5% or so. So it's very low addition. We don't do anything unique. This is a yeast-driven beer. You kind of have to just get out of the way and let the yeast eat. And treat them right. Obviously, under pitching, under oxygenating. In German, there's a saying to make wheat beer: "Die Hefe muss schwitzen." The yeast has to sweat. You've got to kind of stress it out. And so we beat this yeast up a little bit, and it makes the style that is kind of my go-to year-round favorite, because wheat beer has got this nice complexity in the aroma, but it's also incredibly drinkable. It's also a favorite of mine because I can turn that beer quicker than I can my lagers. Our lagers we give a full 6 weeks to. I give the wheat beer 4 weeks, which is still a lot longer than most people probably do. But we like to brew pretty slow and traditionally. But I do like that I can turn a lot more of that beer. It's probably close to half our volume here at the brewery. It's definitely our number one selling beer, and it's helped that it's not a lager, so I can turn it a little bit quicker. I think one thing to think about on a wheat beer is you got to pay attention as a grower to make sure that your free amino nitrogen is not high. Your target on a wheat malt is generally lower, and that's by design to, again, stress that yeast out and not give it. Fan is like snacks. It's really great accessible food for yeast, and one way you can add layered stress to a wheat beer fermentation is to starve it of free amino nitrogen a little bit. And luckily, wheat just kind of naturally likes to do that. We have not had the struggles that we have had with our barley in that regard. So, but really, I don't think we do anything that probably 1,000 American brewers and 1,000 German breweries do with a wheat beer, except
right.
At the beer garden you can see the wheat where it's growing, and it's just it's a beer style that has survived and been popular for so long because of its simplicity, and you just don't need to do anything to it to keep it great. Just execute it and drink it fresh. Like, don't let a wheat beer sit around, or else. Now, a Weizenbock, right? Because the booze, you can definitely, that thing, I'd give our Weizenbock a year in a keg if it's been cold stored, and it's, it mellows out, it kind of rounds out a little bit. But a wheat beer, a Hefeweizen standard ABV strength, I think a key is to brew it precisely and then just enjoy it quickly, and there's no rocket science.
There's some solid haze stability in here, which is certainly something that brewers, whether they're brewing Hefeweizen or whether they're brewing hazy American IPA, are all chasing. Is this just a relatively standard mash regimen in order to kind of lock that in at various steps?
Yeah, we don't even do a protein rest on this beer. It's really the only beer that we don't do a protein rest on. I think that our grain bill brings enough protein to the table, and we don't need to add anything to it. There's the whole talk about a ferulic acid. I can't say that. Ferulic acid. There we go. There we go. That acid that starts with an F, and where that gets generated, and that's a precursor to the clove characteristics. And I like kind of a balanced wheat beer, one that isn't too banana or too clove. It's kind of right down the middle. So if you do mash too low in the protein side, I think you can drive a little bit more clove. So we actually don't even do a protein rest on that. Although we've got we do multiple saccharification steps, but we don't do a protein rest on the wheat beer.
Beyond the beers that you're currently making and your current approach to agriculture, are there projects on the horizon that you are in early stages on, or some stuff that's on your list of things to tackle next, for Riggs Beer Company or for the farm itself?
Well, we just put up a silo here at the brewery to store our corn in. We also needed a road sign, so we kind of killed two birds with one stone, put our logo up there. We've invested in a big PTO-driven grain vacuum where we can move grain more gently than we can with augers. We installed the vacuum system onto our grain bins at the farm so that we can more gently handle and move the grain. I think that's kind of the direction we're going, is how do we do a better job from the seed to the glass. We're not looking to expand really. We're my brother and I and our wives own the company outright. We don't have an investor. We're at a very nice size at 2,000 to 3,000 barrels with a healthy tap room and beer garden. If you're not happy with that, I think then you're probably not a brewer. You're probably an investor, and I'm not an investor. We're at a stable position that we still have control. We have a small team that we work with, and they're really passionate and driven, and it's fun. We're not in a rush to go and mess that up because we just want more barrels. So I think investing in, we rent out, or I guess we have our grain custom cleaned. We don't have our own grain cleaner. We have our own corn cleaner, which is a little bit different, but the small grains are all cleaned somewhere else. I think someday it makes sense for us to bring that in-house. Eric's not exactly a spring chicken. Someday we're probably going to assume we'll probably buy the malt house when he's ready to give it up and bring that internal as well. But as far as is Riggs Beer Company coming out with a hard seltzer, I'm going to go ahead and say that will absolutely never happen.
You're not going to grow sugar cane on the farm there?
No, I don't like hazy IPAs. I got nothing against anybody that puts a donut in a boil if they want to do that. I just don't like those beers, and we're not going to make them. There's enough breweries that are, so we're not looking to branch out into different categories or anything like that. I think we just want to kind of get better at what we do, and maybe someday not have to pay the bank a monthly payment. That'd be pretty sweet. I spent several years in Germany in the industry, where a total of 3 years, so I guess a couple of years. A lot of the breweries that are most successful there are breweries that paid off debt and have just kind of operated and focused on their home market and quality. And that's how you have a brewery not go bankrupt, is you kind of live modestly, make a product that you're passionate about and that you're focused on, and don't make the bank a ton of money, right? If you can get out from underneath that, pay that to your people. And that's why they won't leave, because you're like, hey, I could have paid the bank $7,000 a month on this loan, or I could just split that difference and pay it to the 10 people full time here. And now why the hell would they leave? That sounds like a better investment, and makes your business better in the long run if you can shift that value that you're making away from leaving the company, leaving the brewery, and keeping it in the brewery. And that's a good way to safeguard your brewery, I think.
That kind of relates to the question that we typically end with, which is, what does success look like for you? And it sounds to me like building that legacy, building that thing that feeds and takes care of all the people that are a part of the business, and the thing that maintains this family legacy, through from this fifth generation onto future generations, is a pretty important thing for you.
Yep, definitely on the farm side. I mean, it sounds weird, but I'm not as emotionally attached to this brewery as I am the farm. I love the brewery. Sure, I'm here 75 hours a week. This is my baby. But someday if my brother and I we're old and we don't want to work really hard in a brewery anymore, it's not that we've ever said, this thing has to now be a 5-generation brewery. It'd be cool if that turns out to be the case, but really the non-negotiable is that we can keep the farm, because that's kind of the original reason why we did this. We want to farm it in a more sustainably positive way. Like I want to shift as much as we can, as quick as we can, away from some of the practices that I think are good in the short term for commodity farming, but not good in the long term. So sustainability is a big thing for us. I think we've achieved a lot of success so far. I mean, financially a little bit, but every year we publish a sustainability report where we talk about all of our numbers and how much input we use and all the other stuff. Agronomically, what we're doing that's better. We just got designated a 5-star farm from the local soil and water conservation district for our wheat production here at the brewery. That's success. We haven't closed during coronavirus. That's success.
Yeah.
We've paid all of our people. I mean, it's easy when you're a small team to say, okay, we're going to fire through this and we're going to shift into package. Something I didn't mention, we didn't can before April.
Wow.
We were draft only for the first 4 years of our brewery. And then we're like, oh, so the draft market's not going to happen anymore for a while. So we shifted very quickly into canning, and that allowed us to retain our people full time. And so we're going to keep making liquid, and we're going to put it in a can. And that's success. If you can kind of pivot real quick and not crush your team and your people and your business, that's success. I think really I'm really happy with what we've been able to do in the first 4.5 years of the venture. But at the same time, your work's never, ever, ever done. So you just got to keep fighting every day to get better and more efficient. Can we use less water for every barrel that we make in a year? Probably. How do we do that? Oh, do we need to invest in something to help us do that? Okay, well, let's put it on the list. Is it the number 1 next investment, or is it number 10 on the list? And every year you just kind of reinvest that money into the brewery, and before you know it, you look at where you've come and you're like, man, this is a lot cooler thing than it was 4 years ago even.
Yeah. Well said. Nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico partner with G&D Chillers, of course, including Riggs Beer Company. HS1228 takes you all the way to the heart of the West Coast. Mountain Rose Herbs offers the highest quality organic herbs, spices, and teas. Yakima Valley Hops is your hop source, whether you're brewing 5 gallons or 5 barrels. Abe Beverage Equipment offers turnkey brewing and packaging solutions, and Craft Beer and Brewing's all-access subscriptions are the best way to support this very podcast. Matt Riggs, Riggs Beer Company, Urbana, Illinois. If people want to learn more about what you do, where do they find you all?
We have a website. It's probably fairly dated. We have Facebook and Instagram that we put stuff on occasionally, but we don't have anybody that's really full-time into that. If you're ever driving through Central Illinois, come by the brewery. Back when the world was normal, we gave really, I think, great tours. My brother or I are the only two that we ever, have give the tour, because we want somebody to be able to ask any question. It's a 2-hour-long tour. So hopefully, if there's a vaccine or whatever happens and we can start doing that again, sign up for one of those in advance. I guarantee you'll really like it, because we get down into the weeds, and obviously towards the end we start drinking all the beers, and that's the best way to do it, is to come out and visit us, because we're not ever going to expand the radius very far, and our online presence is admittedly probably pretty weak and boring.
Matt, thanks for joining me for the podcast. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I really appreciate what you're doing to, build this estate approach to brewing ingredients, and also keep 6-row brewing in North America alive. Yeah, cheers.
Cheers, Jamie. Thanks.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com, or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.